Satan is to us a symbol rather than an anthropomorphic being, although many members of the Church of Satan who are mystically inclined would prefer to think of Satan in a very real anthropomorphic way. Of course, we do not discourage this because we realize that to many individuals, a picture, a well-wrought picture of their mentor or their tutelary divinity is very important for them to conceptualize ritualistically. However, Satan symbolically is the teacher, the informer of the whys and the wherefores of the world. And in answer to those who would label us devil worshippers or be very quick to assume us to be Satan worshippers, I must say that Satan demands study, not worship, in its truest symbology.
Hello, listeners. I'm Nathan Dickey, host of Trolling with Logic, and the voice you just heard was that of Anton Szandor LaVey, 1930 to 1997, the writer and musician best known as the founder of the Church of Satan, author of the Satanic Bible, and figurehead of modern Satanism. That particular recording of LaVey is taken from Nat Friedland's LP recording, The Occult Explosion, released by United Artists Records in 1973. On this episode, we interviewed Magister Bill M, a fourth-degree reverend in the Church of Satan. It was a lively and fascinating conversation that we think you'll enjoy, but I did want to put in this message at the beginning to let you know that the audio quality is not great on my end. It is tolerable and intelligible, but my not-so-trusty Blue Yeti microphone decided to break down right before we recorded, so I had to resort to using my headset, which resulted in lesser quality sound on my end than regular listeners might be used to. And with that out of the way, enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to Trolling with Logic, the podcast where we bring the hammer down on ignorance, unreason, and superstition on a bi-weekly basis. I am your host, Nathan Dickey, and with me today, for the first time in a while, I think, is the whole crew. Cal.
Hi there.
Cal's here. Kitch is here.
Hail Santa.
And Jen is here as well with us.
Hail Satan, food of the vegans.
On today's episode, we're covering maybe, potentially, what might be a controversial topic among our listeners. We're talking about Satanism, specifically of the variety formulated and defined by Anton Szandor LaVey, who founded the Church of Satan 51 years ago, 1966, and as codified in LaVey's seminal work, the Satanic Bible, which was published in 1969. And joining us today to talk about this subject is Reverend Bill M, who is a priest in the Church of Satan and who holds the title of Magister in the Church's hierarchy. Bill M has personally conducted satanic weddings and funerals and has appeared on radio and television to discuss various aspects of LaVeyan Satanism. In addition to writing for various satanic publications, Bill also hosts the Devil's Mischief podcast on the Radio Free Satan Network, which, if I'm not mistaken, has the distinction of being the longest-running RFS podcast. Is that correct?
The longest-running Satanism podcast that I know of.
Well, outside of the Church of Satan, Bill also holds bachelor's and master's degrees in mathematics, has a special passion for music, and is also a member of the High IQ Society Mensa. Lots of M's going on there. Welcome to the show, Bill M.
Thank you for having me. And I enjoy Trolling with Logic. I've listened to a number of your episodes. You have a great thing going on here.
Thank you very much.
Let's start by clearing up some of the most common misconceptions right off the bat about the Church of Satan held by large portions of the general public and even among skeptics as well. Quite contrary to the impression I had growing up as a child in the 90s, which was during the peak and tail end of the satanic panic here in the States. Satanists do not worship the devil, nor do they engage in human or animal sacrifices. What does Satan actually represent to you and your church?
Well, that's correct, and Satan for us is a metaphor. We're a religion about the carnal rather than spiritual, and we think Satan is the best mythological archetype in this day and age to sort of represent that. So we embrace a lot of things that have been traditionally given the devil's name, like pride, lust, rational self-interest, skepticism, nonconformity, atheism, humor, and so on. We find these things to be self-empowering, so we shamelessly embrace them rather than shun them.
Let's talk about your position in the Church of Satan as sort of a gateway to getting into the hierarchical structure of the organization.
Sure.
What privileges and responsibilities are assumed by those such as yourself with the rank of Magister?
Well, first, just to give a quick correction before, you had mentioned me as both a priest and magister. Those are technically two different levels, but they're all considered part of the priesthood, and anybody from priest up above can be addressed as reverend, so I don't take it as a demotion or anything. But we give out titles just based off of individual merit, and if we see somebody who is in the organization who seems to be representing the philosophy well and really creating a number of things, seems to grasp it, seems to be a good spokesperson for it, then we may give them a title. It's sort of an honorary thing. It's not an initiatory thing. I didn't become a magister because, I memorized these scrolls or, something silly like that. That's where the titles really come from. People in priesthood in general up above can be official media representatives of the organization. That's why the Church of Satan got in contact with me after you contacted their office for an interview.
I just have to ask, probably the one question you ask them, what is, when you meet new people for the first time, when you tell them your involvement in the Church of Satan, what's the kind of reactions you get?
I've gotten a variety of reactions. A lot of Satanists, including myself, are usually, reluctant to necessarily come out as Satanists. I certainly don't tell anybody I work with about Satanism, first and foremost, because I don't think anybody should be discussing, religion in the workplace. Religion and politics are always touchy subjects. But I've gotten a variety of reactions. Most people who I choose to come out with are pretty, level-headed people. And then when I give them the explanation of what it is and what it isn't, they say, okay, I understand, that's your thing and that's fine and I'm fine with it. Some other people who I thought were pretty level-headed and skeptics suddenly become, self-righteous over that dreaded S word, and I've gotten some negative reactions as well, but fortunately those have been pretty minimal. But again, a lot of it comes down to choosing who you decide to come out to as a Satanist.
Yeah, because a lot of, what I've known in the skeptic and atheist community, they tend to view this as, Satanism as just, kind of unnecessary provoking of the religious, and do you ever get that at all?
Well, yeah, I've been accused of that, and people try saying, oh, you're a Satanist because you hate your Christian parents or you're angry against them. I'm like, no, I discovered Satanism after I'd already moved out of my parents' place, and I get along great with my parents, and they're still married and together, and no, I wasn't abused as a kid, or, sorry to disappoint you. Not you specifically, but, some of these people who say that. And it's true that within the skeptic community, a lot of people will see that we do ritual and just jump to conclusions saying, well, Satanism is a religion and therefore I want to see it eradicated just with all the other religions. But as I think you covered well in the episode, probably your most recent one that I listened to, of Trolling with Logic, about the biological component of religion, I personally believe that religion is not something that's going to completely go away. It's not anytime soon. And non-theistic religions do exist. Satanism is one example of that.
Yeah, fantasy and ritual are, as I understand it, important aspects, even central aspects of satanic practice as LaVey envisioned it, and this is one aspect of Satanism that I find pretty fascinating myself, namely ritual as psychodrama. For listeners who may not be aware of this, why is fantasy and ritual central to your church, and what benefits are conferred to human psychology from its use?
Well, I think all humans overall in general still like ritual. They like symbolism and ceremony. And it doesn't even have to be in a religious context. When we do graduations from high school and college, we all wear, caps and gowns. There's the, 21 gun salute and military rituals. There's cutting open a ribbon to celebrate a new store opening. So I think humans are overall pretty symbol-minded, and they like ritualistic expression. I'd like to think of Satanism as one of the few religions, if not the only religion, that sort of accepts that fact of reality that, ritual is a psychological tool. We're just sort of the only people who will admit that that's the reality of it. There's nothing supernatural going on.
Those two, can I just ask, those two
Sure.
dates that Nathan read out at the very beginning, sorry to backtrack a little bit, 1966 and 1969, were those coincidental, or did he wait around to go, right, I need as many kind of six-looking numbers as possible to do this?
I don't know about that with 1966. I mean, I think it was just he was in the right time and place to do that. Obviously, there's the number 666, which comes from the Bible. It comes from Revelation. We don't view that as being really satanically significant per se, but it's a number that, because it has like a bad reputation, like the number 13, kind of gives it character. So we playfully make use of that, even if, it doesn't mean anything in the real world. It comes from that one line in the Holy Bible, Revelations 13. In older transcripts I've read said that it was actually the number 616 before it got translated. So
with the Bible, the character of Satan in the Bible, is that taken, as some have suggested, from older pagan religion? And talking about Pan, and then it was sort of bastardized into Satan in the Bible and made to look evil, even though he was, the god of merriment and fucking about and all that kind of stuff. Is that how you see it, or what is your take on where the character originally came from that is actually depicted in the Bible?
Well, the character of Satan, the word Satan itself comes from Hebrew. It means the adversary. So at its central core, it's sort of the adversarial character. You find different representations of Satan in the mythology of the Holy Bible, but then you also see other interpretations later on, like Milton's Paradise Lost, other sorts of fiction. But there was certainly, some active work, I think, from Christians trying to bastardize local pagan religions and the like. So you do find some of those adaptations of Pan and stuff. A lot of neo-pagans and Wiccans sort of like get mad at us today. They see our image of Satan and say, no, they took our horned god, and, that's what they bastardize. And it's, well, first of all, Wicca is not an ancient religion. So, we understand that a lot of those characters do come from the paganism, which is why we don't necessarily do things like the Black Mass, because Catholic ritual itself is sort of based on pagan symbolism. And as Anton LaVey pointed out, the Black Mass in that sense is kind of a redundancy to try to blaspheme something that's already kind of a blasphemy thing. We do have the Black Mass listed in the satanic rituals. The purpose we would do that for is if, say, you have a lot of religious guilt and you sort of want to get that psychologically out of your system, sort of stepping in there and doing all the blasphemy to sort of get it out of your system might be a good catharsis to move on.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of misunderstanding among skeptics who look at Satanism, and some confusion where they think that when you talk about the concepts of lesser magic and greater magic, which is a major concept within Satanism, they think it has something to do with woo or
supernatural things and the same sort of stuff you find in New Age circles or occult circles.
Yeah, what do the concepts of lesser and greater magic actually entail?
Well, first of all, I think it's worth pointing out that magic and ritual and those sorts of aspects of Satanism are things that Satanists spend very little time actually doing in practice. If you were to go, say, to Church of Satan forums and talk to other Satanists, I mean, we don't really spend much time talking and thinking much about ritual. That's sort of an optional tool. There are some Satanists who don't ritualize at all. And even some people like myself who maybe consider doing it frequently might mean like a few times a year. So, but to get back to your question about lesser and greater magic, just as we take Satan as a metaphor, we take magic as a metaphor as well. And again, this is something that goes beyond Satanism. You can have people who don't believe in the supernatural might describe like a wedding or a concert they went to as a magical experience, because it's a very emotionally fulfilling one. And that's what we see it as. It's a way of making an emotional experience for yourself. So we divide the concept of magic into lesser and greater magic. Lesser magic is what we call sort of sleight of hand and manipulation, of situations or other people to your advantage. We don't spell magic with a CK like you see some occult people doing, because some occult circles will spell it MAGICK because they want to say this is real magic and it's different from stage magic. And we see stage magic is not really being all that different. Stage magic is where you set up a theatrical situation to get a desired effect, and that's all we think ritual is. There's nothing really truly supernatural about it. So lesser magic would be sort of tricks of the trade, at its simplest, manipulating people. That concept has been expanded in Anton LaVey's book, The Satanic Witch. And greater magic would be more of the actual formalized ritual. We're actually setting up the candles and all that. And what you're doing is you're putting yourself in a psychological state where you can let out your emotions and take things at a very subjective level.
Yeah, it seems kind of strange to me that academics and people who treat these kind of subjects in intellectual forums and in an intellectual manner, like in academia, tend to not take the Church of Satan's philosophy seriously, and yet they'll go to somebody like Aleister Crowley and they'll take his work seriously, which seems kind of an ironic way of looking at it, because Aleister Crowley actually believed in the supernatural, whereas the Church of Satan is more attuned to reality and kind of manipulating reality and understanding it to empower yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, we start with the premise that there is really the carnal, there isn't the spiritual and all notions of deities. Those are all creations of the human imagination. But at the same time, if you recognize that as fantasy, you can still utilize that as long as you recognize that what you're doing there is fantasy. An analogy that I use is that if you're really get into a movie or a book, say, a fictional movie or book, you have people who are obsessed, say, with like Star Wars, and they can really get into the movie, but they know it's fiction, but that doesn't take away from the fact that they can get emotionally caught up in the movie, and it can be a great, thrilling experience. And I think that's what a lot of people in the skeptical community don't really understand, that, yeah, you can separate the fantasy from reality, and it's okay to be a skeptic, but to enjoy fantasy, recognizing that it is fantasy.
Yeah, so it's okay to enjoy a Marvel action film and understand that the physics of them are completely impossible and that they're ridiculous, and still get enjoyment out of it. Suspend your disbelief enough to enjoy the action, the film, but not start believing that you can fly if you jump off the top of a building.
LaVey wrote in the Satanic Bible and stated often in interviews throughout his life that Satanism demands study, not worship. So Satanism is not only about self-awareness, which implies an understanding of the science of psychology, but also what we've been getting into a little bit just now, knowledge of how the universe works. So now with this, we get into what will probably be of most interest to our regular listeners. What is the Church of Satan's general position on science and skepticism?
We're pro-science and pro-skepticism, even just from the symbolic view. Like, we know that science has always sort of been given the devil's name. And to this day, we still see Christian creationists and even people who aren't Christian embracing like bad science and hate science for shattering their superstitions and illusions. So we do embrace science. And if people say that science is the devil, it's like, well, call me a Satanist then.
I suppose we'll have to go a wee bit into the satanic panic. So where did all the satanic panic arise? Was it just directly related to the rise of Church of Satan, or, just how did it all this ball get rolling?
Well, a lot of what really, I think, got the launch really moving was a book called Michelle Remembers, which put forth a claim that there was this person who was abused by devil worshippers, and we took her to a hypnotist, and she had all these repressed memories. And you ended up seeing that theme a lot throughout the 1980s.
Yeah.
Where somebody would be on Donahue or Sally Jesse Raphael on these sensationalist talk shows saying, yeah, I was abducted by these Satanists, these people who worship the devil, and they sacrifice babies, and they kidnapped babies, and they had them on a buffet line to eat, and drank goat's blood and all this stuff. And, the talk shows would eat this up. And maybe if we were lucky, they would also invite us, somebody from the Church of Satan. So after listening to somebody give this sob story for like 30 minutes that the audience is eating up, they suddenly turn to us and we have like 2 minutes to retort. But a lot of what that ended up being was something called false memory syndrome. I'm sure some people in the skeptical community are aware of that. There was a belief that some of these people had a traumatic experience, and with the right kind of hypnosis and recovery, we can recover those memories. In a nutshell, what it ends up being is that you end up sort of planting false memories by suggestion. Did the person have black hair? Yes, the person had black hair. As soon as you say that, if you start visualizing and so on.
It's like the cold,
so that's
basically the techniques the cold readers use.
Yeah. But in an even bigger situation, because you have very heavy influence where you're putting somebody under hypnosis. But then when people examine some of the claims, they realize things didn't really add up. And I've seen evangelical Christians who claim to be former Satanists, and you realize that their stories are kind of inflated. There was one guy, I can't remember his name, he was pretty prominent, saying, like, I used to be in the satanic cult in college, and some of his classmates from college said, no, you're making that up. We were part of like a New Age study group for like 6 months, and that was it.
I believe that was Mike Warnke.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's when they started expanding the definition of Satanism to mean anything that wasn't kind of evangelical, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, and then like any sort of symbol became a satanic symbol if it was like a band logo, or if there was a crime committed, they would like look through and say, oh, this person had a copy of the Satanic Bible, so that proves it. He had a copy of the Quran and all these other books, and we've seen insane people who had Catcher in the Rye in their pockets too. I mean, insane people will find some justification to channel their illegal acts kind of creatively, and some people have done that with a satanic aesthetic, if you will. But that doesn't mean that there's this organized group of roving bands of devil worshippers in the night who are kidnapping children and all this stuff. The FBI had looked into these claims and found that really wasn't anything to support the satanic panic. There were a couple of isolated incidents like that of crazy people, but made for good television.
I've studied the Satanic Panic pretty in depth because I find it a pretty fascinating chronicle of how human nature goes wrong in all sorts of ways. And it seems to me like when major television outlets and mainstream journalists in that time spoke to representatives from the Church of Satan, they weren't really interested in getting at the truth. They kind of fetishized Satanists.
Yeah.
They would bring them on and say, oh, we're talking to a real live Satanist, dismissing or ignoring the humanity of the person they're speaking to, and just throwing up this representative as like, look, we've got a real live Satanist here. Isn't that scary?
Yeah. And they'll start with like a montage of like miscellaneous things, like people being loaded into an ambulance or splattered blood, and things that might have not have anything to do with each other. Dramatic music.
I don't know if you know personally some of the people that were approached by the mainstream media during that time, but were they, how good were they at throwing off these mainstream journalists and news outlets off of their script? Or were they able to do that effectively?
Well, I've known Blanche Barton, who's LaVey's widow, was on a number of shows, and some other people as well, and they had told me that, like, yeah, we were there, and they filmed, like, all this stuff and recorded all this and cut it down to 2 minutes on there. So even when they might be good at getting a good comeback and stuff like that in, they'll edit things down, whatever makes for best television. Even to this day, in modern times, there have been times when people have interviewed us, for the Church of Satan, and then they don't have printing the story because like we're not really exciting enough. They're kind of like disappointed that we don't sacrifice animals and eat babies and all that stuff. And it's like, oh, okay.
One thing I have to ask, where does all the goat symbolism come from with Satanism?
Well, I think a lot of that comes all the way down to the archetypes of the goats versus sheep. Okay. And that is something that comes from the Holy Bible. There's a passage about separating the goats from the sheep. And just sort of archetypically speaking of mythology and the symbolism of goats versus sheep, you think of sheep as sort of being, herding animals, animals that get together. They depend on the size of the group for safety. Whereas the goat is sort of the contrast of that, the symbol being someone who's more independent, more defiant. That fits in nicely, I think, philosophically with Satanism.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, this again relates to the Satanic Panic, and at the time with all the rock music, was there any of those bands that were actually proper Satanists themselves that you know of?
There were a few. King Diamond immediately comes to mind. He is an actual member of the Church of Satan. But what's funny about his music, though, his music doesn't really talk much about Satanism. His lyrics are more about these stories and epic stories he has for full albums and stuff. Yeah, there were certainly a few, but I mean, for the most part, there were bands that realized the aesthetic, putting a pentagram,
Yeah.
created controversy, and that sold well. The people in Slayer, for example, certainly not Satanists. A lot of them are, I believe they're Christian.
All right.
I know at least the lead singer of Slayer is Catholic, and I believe Black Sabbath, as great a band as they are, at least started out as a Catholic band who wanted to put out explicitly Christian music.
Well, yeah, they were Christians for the most part. Geezer Butler from Black Sabbath did dabble in, I wouldn't say Crowley, but some of the Dennis Wheatley and some of the witchcraft stuff. But, yeah, not that I know with Satanism. If anything, like, the original Black Sabbath were blue-collar workers from the streets of Birmingham and, a bit superstitious about things. And that's sort of where I think they were coming from, the aesthetic and stuff. I think when they wear the crosses, when I see them with the crosses, I don't really think so much of, like, Christianity. I think of, graveyards and vampires.
Yes, I know I think the drummer of Iron Maiden, he's actually come out as an evangelical Christian, isn't he?
Yeah. And then when Ronnie James Dio joined Black Sabbath in 79 or so, he had brought the sign of the horns and popularized that as a heavy metal gesture.
Yeah, I'd always wondered where that came from. Was that just him that came up with that?
He was the one who popularized it for heavy metal, and he got it himself as Italian-American heritage. It was something his grandmother used to do, and he said Ozzy would flash the peace sign on stage, and I wanted to do something different, so I started doing that. The actual gesture itself goes all the way back. There have been caves in Mesopotamia from 4,000 years ago where you can see people doing the gesture. I was reading a clickbait article, a headline recently saying Joel Osteen was like flashing the horns to do the Texas Longhorn Hook'em horns sign, and it was like upsetting all these people. Ooh, he's using double horns. Satanists do use that as a symbol. It's even described in the Satanic Bible, but we obviously don't have a monopoly on it. In one context, it's going to mean Satanism. In another context, it's going to mean heavy metal or being Italian or something.
It's interesting you should say that, because there's a lot of modern day conspiracy theories, especially to do with World War II or the rocket program or all these sorts of things. They talk about NASA having a lot of people in it who used special hand signals that they linked to the Illuminati or Satanism or God knows what. How many NASA scientists do you know that are actually members of the Church of Satan, without naming any names, if any?
I don't know any offhand. I certainly know some Satanists who work in astrophysics and aerospace engineering. I'm trying to remember if anybody actually, I can think of at least one who may have worked for NASA. I'd have to go check his LinkedIn profile.
Was Werner von Braun a Satanist? Werner von Braun, the father of rocketry. Don't worry, I'm fairly certain the answer is no, considering he was around before the start of the Church of Satan. But I'm just interested because there's a lot of this sort of mythology goes into it, and a lot of people, of course, lump everything to do with Illuminati, Satanism, etc., into what you are involved in. How do you separate that, or do you even bother?
Well, sometimes you can work with it. I mean, I think there maybe is like some power if somebody does believe you are in the Illuminati. If somebody really believes I control all these banks and stuff like that, maybe that person will keep their distance from me.
It's great fun, isn't it?
But I mean, other than that, I mean, just from separating it, we try our best to say, here's what we're about. You can go to our website and read it. But, as we said before, people don't want to do that. They would rather find some YouTube channel that confirms, their bias and gives them a new story of the Illuminati or whatever to follow. Or we'll hear that, the Church of Satan, you're not real Satanists. The real Satanists are these people in Bohemian Grove and blah, blah, blah. Okay, where's the evidence for that?
Pentangle. What's the origins behind that? And because it seems to that's one symbol that seems to rile some people up, something rotten.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, like the horns gesture, it's one of these symbols that has been around for thousands of years and shows up in thousands of different contexts. For us, traditionally, the 5-pointed star can symbolize the 5 elements, with the spirit being the 5th element. And again, this is all, we know this is all symbolism. We know the periodic table trumps the reality of fire, air, earth, water. But symbolically speaking, when the pentagram is drawn 1 point up, it's to represent the spirit's rise, from matter. But since Satanism is a materialistic religion about the flesh rather than spirit, when it's point down, it represents sort of the spirit's descent into matter. So it represents a grounding of earthly existence. Okay. More specifically, we have the sigil of Baphomet, our symbol that you'll see on the Satanic Bible. That's actually trademarked by the Church of Satan. And with the point down, it makes nicely for the head of the goat to fit in there. And the goat, as I explained, has its own symbolism. And you'll see the Hebrew letters around, which spell out Leviathan, which is, in mythology, the serpent of the watery abyss. And you think of the, if I'm pronouncing it right, Erebus, the serpent biting its tail, going around the circle. So it kind of echoes back to that as well.
I was just thinking about the whole taboo-ness that you've been going against. You mentioned at the very beginning about all sorts of things that are very, very taboo in Christianity, such as sex, nudity, all sorts of stuff. I understand that you are kind of rallying against that in one way, shape or form, and actually encouraging people to explore their natural human desires and encouraging people to be more open about themselves at times when otherwise they might feel like they were forced not to sort of disclose things about themselves or experience things that they might want to experience, that don't, of course, hurt other people, that are natural for us. Is that right? Is that, have I just gone off the script there completely, or is it all about actually encouraging people to be more open where taboos otherwise exist in their, societies?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I mean, first of all, I wouldn't say we necessarily are preaching to anybody to do something particular. We say pretty explicitly Satanism is not a religion for everybody, and we have no plans of, trying to convert people. It's why we don't proselytize, because Satanism is not for everybody, and there are some people who we think by their nature, maybe they do need to depend on some sort of spirituality or some kind of belief in an external God to give meaning in their lives. And if that's the case, fine. We just say, don't try to force your belief on other people who don't wish to be included. And if anything, we get a lot of people who are kind of like, oh, I want to be a Satanist. I want to be a Satanist. And we kind of see what they're doing. And like, no, this really isn't for you.
You don't know what you're talking about. I want to join the Bohemian Grove. No, that's not what we're about.
Oh, I gotta say, and this is like one of the biggest conceptions these days. There are so many people who believe like we're the Illuminati.
Yeah.
They not only believe the Illuminati exists, but that any sort of website with Satan in the title is somehow, a portal to it. I get several messages every week, almost always people from Nigeria or Kenya. I don't know why it's like that there.
We get that as well.
Yeah, people say I want to, I want to join you guys. Join what? I want to be rich. So then I got to explain, like, no, the Illuminati doesn't exist, and we're not the Illuminati. And I don't know who told you this, but somebody's lied to you. And what kind of baffles me is like these people really believe that not only the Illuminati exists, and not only every website with Satan is an advertisement for them, but that we're hiring, that we have millionaire job positions to give away to people. And you don't even have the courtesy to submit a resume or CV.
Apparently, the Illuminati is anybody who doesn't agree with anybody who is part of mainstream media or anybody who is against Christianity.
There'll be people, I'm sure, listening to this saying, "Yeah, see, that's exactly the sort of thing the Illuminati guy would say."
Yeah. And I've got an all-seeing eye behind me on a poster, and a lot of people saw that. I got that specifically to trigger people, but people didn't believe me when I said I got it specifically to trigger them, which was hilarious. It's hilarious. I was speaking to flat earthers at the time as well. Great fun, people. Great fun.
Regarding also the idea of blasphemy and stuff like that, it could be said that some of the blasphemous stuff against Christianity might be a little cliche or old hat, and Satanism is still an adversarial religion, so we do believe there's such a thing as blasphemy for, other sort of norms and ideals going on. I did an episode of The Devil's Mischief, my podcast, a comedy podcast, where I sort of poked fun at modern day sacred cows, which aren't so much Christianity these days, but, Star Wars or marijuana and all these things that people hold as their own sacred cows. So I think there's something to be said about being skeptic about those things as well.
Just to what's in there, like regards to the Illuminati, do you ever come across any Alex Jones fans? You must have done at some point.
Oh yeah, some people.
They're quite entertaining as well.
I've looked through like some stuff from InfoWars, and once in a while I find like a great article. It's like I'm reading it. Wow, this is actually pretty good. And then I get to the tinfoil hat stuff near the bottom. It's like, oh, okay, just wrote it.
All right.
But yeah, there has sort of been like a new rise of, I wouldn't say a new satanic panic, but certainly a whole big thing about the Bohemian Grove as was brought up, things of that nature.
Do you ever get any emails from Mike Adams fans?
I don't know who that is.
Oh, lucky guy. Yeah, he's the health ranger he goes by, and yeah, he's kind of, I would say, crazy. I think he's crazier than Alex Jones.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's saying a lot.
Like, he's a more genuinely crazy version of Alex Jones, I think.
Okay. Well, now I gotta look him up.
Yeah.
There have been a number of other religious organizations springing up, especially in the last 15 or so years, claiming to be satanic. Are these upstart churches trying to imitate you, or are they trying to completely reinvent the wheel of modern Satanism? And how do you view these other satanic religions that are springing up?
Seems to be a little bit of both. I mean, when I first discovered Satanism, I read the Satanic Bible and said, okay, this is for me. This is something I can certainly identify with. I looked at some of the other satanic organizations that existed, Church of Satan, Temple of Set, and things with really, really similar sounding names, like, Mosque of Lucifer Reformed. And after examining them, I came to the conclusion that the Church of Satan was the one that best represented what was in the Satanic Bible and what my convictions were. Some of the others had absolutely nothing to do with Satanism. I understood it. Temple of Set was one organization that really believes in, literal deity Set and Satan being an offshoot of that or something. Their leader was trying to recruit people all the time on back in the day with news groups on alt.satanism, which was a mess of a place. But then I've seen some other organizations that claim to believe in the same things as us and claim to be like a new version of the Church of Satan. And I look at what they're doing and say, you're not really doing anything new. And if anything, this and this and this that you're saying goes directly against what is said here in the Satanic Bible. And I know a lot of people will hear that from the outside and say, oh, well, that's just like, Protestants saying that Catholics aren't real Christians and vice versa. But I really don't think that's the case, because in the case of Protestants and Catholics, they're still different sects of the same religion, because they still go by the same book. They still ultimately have the same deity structure. They have the same theological origins. But you can't say the same thing about the Church of Satan and some of these other devil-worshipping groups and the like.
One question I know a few people will be thinking of or asking themselves is, do you get to wear any cool clothes? And if you do, can you describe them to us?
I have clothes that I wear for the ritual chamber, because when you're doing the ritual, you're setting up that environment for suspension of disbelief, and so you want to get theatrical and things like that. I have a couple of black robes. Mine are actually graduation robes that I've sewn hoods onto. I have this molded mask I also sometimes wear for rituals. And I have my whole altar and all that set up. And again, that's for the fantasy element. Day by day, some days I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt out of the house. So.
Do you ever enter or exit a room with a smoke bomb?
A room with a smoke bomb?
Yeah, you know how sometimes you have like magicians or anything like that come in or out of a room and they'll throw a smoke bomb down and then run away, and it's as if they vanished. Have you ever done that, or do you ever feel like doing that just to add a little bit of extra spark to it?
Yeah, that would be cool. I mean, a lot of the times I'm ritualizing alone, but yeah, for group rituals that could be a fun thing.
Yeah, cool. You could do it alone in front of a mirror. I just think you'd probably smoke out your bathroom and then you would hit the door on the way out or something.
Yeah, and then I have smoke because I'm trying to read passages and stuff like that. And
right, true. All these things you have to consider.
Find out the hard way sometimes when you get into that and get in that environment and set it up. I've had plenty of ritual mishaps with things like that going on.
Oh, no. So you get the fake blood out and then you spill it all over your Satanic Bible and then you have to rinse it off and then, it's a big delay. And
blame that to the director.
Here's kind of a two-part question. The Church of Satan has been in existence for a little over half a century now. What goals has the church accomplished in that time, do you feel? And as a second part, what are its current goals looking forward?
Well, I'd say that it still serves as being best representation of Satanism, being what's represented in the Satanic Bible, and still continue to this day having media representatives in cases like this podcast, and other news outlets, being a central place for people to go to. The other thing is, the Church of Satan is made up of individuals kind of in line with Satanism, because Satanism is a very pro-individualism religion, and the idea of what are you doing for yourself to take this stuff in the Satanic Bible and apply it to yourself to do things for your life, whether that's being more successful in your business or more successful with your art, or however you define success. So I think if you want to look at the success of the Church of Satan, you want to look to what its members are doing I wrote an essay about this, explaining that Satanism is not a congregational religion, so we shouldn't really expect the organization, the Church of Satan, to necessarily do things in that sense. The organization serves its administrative purpose, but the action all comes down to the individual Satanists and what they're doing to impact the world.
Yes, and Magus Peter Gilmore, in his book, The Satanic Scriptures, wrote about the myth of the satanic community.
Yeah, that's an essay you can also read for free on churchofsatan.com.
The individualism aspect is that also why the COS doesn't do conventions and all these sorts of community things, because when you get right down to it, the individuals within the church might not necessarily get along with each other.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we don't have any social obligations. It's possible to just join the Church of Satan and never speak to another member again. There's some people who've done that, who felt they got a lot out of the Satanic Bible, the other works of LaVey and Gilmore, and decide to just get a lifetime membership just as a way of showing, the ritualistic way, you could say, of showing their affiliation. Don't necessarily want to work with other people. Other people like myself, I like networking with other Satanists, whether it's through Radio Free Satan or some of the other projects that I've done along the way. But yeah, we do get together once in a while, but that's like the exception and not the rule. Like we had something for the 50th anniversary and also a year before that to celebrate year 50, because we start the numbering with 1.
So Bohemian Grove only happens every once in a while then?
Do you keep any numbers of how many Church of Satan members exist worldwide?
We do have those numbers, but I actually don't know them, and they're actually kept secret. That was a practice that we did very early on. I think Anton LaVey felt that if we were to reveal our numbers, if it was like a number that people perceived as too big, they might think of us as a threat and, try to actively thwart us. And at the same time, if it was a number too small, people might try to use that as some other reason to hate us. So because of that, the Church of Satanism has kept its number secret, and I honestly don't know how many there are. It certainly wouldn't be too big a number, I would think, because Satanism itself is such a minority religion to begin with, to be honest. We're fine with that.
I'm assuming there's power in the minority status of the church. If you can actually use that to your advantage.
Yeah, certainly. A lot of people do that, and even on the individual level, there's power of secrecy, not, coming out to everybody as a Satanist. I know it certainly wouldn't help me in the office if I, put a sigil Baphomet up on my wall, my office or something. I see a lot of people who are new to Satanism who don't understand that and say like, wow, we should really rise up and correct all these misconceptions and stuff that people have. And it's sort of like, well, we also kind of recognize in Satanism that humans on the whole are pretty dumb and we believe in dumb things, and you can't always educate idiots.
Yeah, that's one of the major problems that we face, isn't it? At the end of the day, you would like to think that everybody could be educated and could be taught to think more critically and taught to think more in line with reality. But the fact of the matter is, the older you get, the more you realize that's a fantasy in itself.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's worth it. I don't think that means we should just throw away and not make any attempts at that. Your show, for example, is great. And some people do end up changing their minds over things. I'm sure all of you know plenty of skeptics who were not skeptics their whole lives.
Oh, yes.
Just the opposite. But it's not something that changes overnight.
It requires a lot of self-reflection to start off with. I think a lot of skeptics that I've known anyway have come to skepticism through self-reflection and through genuine desire to want to understand themselves and the world around them. And a lot of people don't necessarily have that. Living in the city, for example, there's a lot of people who are very distracted, and their day-to-day distraction of the city and city living and being around all these people is one of the things that actually prevents them from exploring themselves and the world around them to a great degree. When I talk to people about microbiology or insects or anything like that, for example, people, they know they are around, but they're not really interested in them. They don't even think about the world around them to that kind of depth on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. And so getting them out of that mindset and caring about the little things and caring about the things that actually form our reality around us is an incredibly difficult thing to do.
Yeah, and with the internet, people thought like, oh great, now all this information is available, people might get more educated, but no, there are a lot of people who would just rather go to YouTube and subscribe to a channel that fulfills their own conspiracy theory mindsets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think people also realize with all the good information that'll be really readily available, all the bad information is going to be. I can't remember who said it, but the great thing about YouTube was everyone gets a voice, and the downside is that everyone's got a voice.
Yeah.
There's no peer review on YouTube.
Yes. On a related note, I have to say I'm really thankful for you guys for actually doing some research on the topic before I came on, because we've been interviewed by some people who do no research, not even like a 30-second skim of Wikipedia or something. And I saw this interview with Blanche Barton, LaVey's widow, who was being interviewed by somebody, and it seemed like she was just getting questions by just doing a Google image search on her name and commenting on random things.
Quick, hide that tab, Nathan.
Is there anything about the Church of Satan of which the general public has anything to be legitimately fearful? The high priest, Peter H. Gilmore, has written about this. He says, yes, there are things that have been said about us that people don't need to be afraid about, but there are things that people should be fearful of. And what are some of those things?
Well, I think some of those things really come down to the same things that people should be afraid of skeptics of, just people who have a skeptical mind, inquiring mind, and are willing to challenge things that are presented to you, and fear that Satanists might not be so quick to accept what you're selling. So in its simplest level, it's those sorts of things.
Yeah, expecting a standard of rationality and critical thinking that a lot of people seem incapable of living up to, and people would rather conform to herdsdink or kind of go along with the flow of society without thinking about how they're controlling where they're headed or why. And that's threatening to a lot of people. They might have to take control and change something.
Mm-hmm. As you get further and further away from the church being set up and look towards the future, do you see any changes happening in terms of the Church of Satan? Or do you think it's going to carry on staying the way it is now? Is it something that is quite fixed? You've come to your ideal religion, or are you open to evolving with the times?
You mean as an individual, or talking about the Church of Satan?
Talking about the church itself more.
Okay. Well, the Church of Satan has gone through a few changes over the years as times have changed. We used to have the grotto system where, it was kind of like covens where we would have local groups, but we got rid of that at some point, realizing that it's counterproductive, and especially in this day and age of the internet, if you want to network with people, you're not limited to geography. If you're interested in a certain subject, and, you have another Satanist who's interested and wants to collaborate on something, it's easy enough to go online and rather than have to, restrict it to somebody who lives near you. So, that's an example. And as times change, I'm sure we'll change in that sense to go adapt to, what works best for us. I don't personally see, maybe this is, where I'm getting really religious. I don't see the dogma of Satanism changing because it's based on the idea of human beings are animals, and we've created all of these things with our mind, human mind, imagination.
Yeah, it's my understanding that what LaVey set up is the foundation, and Church of Satan members are free to kind of build upon that foundation in new ways, but the foundation stays the same.
Yeah, with all of us as Satanists and all as members of the Church of Satan still adhere to the same underlying principles, the same sort of tool set, but how we manifest that can be very different. We're certainly not expected to get along with everybody, within ourselves even. Which is why, for example, the Church of Satan has no official political stance, because we realize politics is a very individual thing, and you can have two Satanists who are in complete agreement with the Satanic Bible, but may have completely different political views, for example.
I see a lot in the literature of the Church of Satan, various products of culture being described as satanic in nature, whether it be books, films, music, products of culture that really stand out and rise above the dross and all the rest of the forgettable products of popular culture. And the word satanic is used as kind of an adjective describing these outstanding achievements of culture, whether or not they were made by people who profess to be LaVeyan Satanists. As a lover of music yourself and a musician, and this is kind of going back to the discussion of music, what music do you personally consider to be particularly satanic in nature in that way, and thus worthy of one's time?
Well, I know when people think of satanic music, they think immediately of heavy metal or sort of, anti-Christian stuff in that sense. And that can certainly be cathartic, but I think eventually you want to go past that. Anton LaVey referred to some of those people as phase one type Satanists who maybe as they first get into it, are really into the blasphemy and the anti-Christian stuff, and it's sort of great, but we say, okay, get that out of your system at some point, move on, and start applying Satanism in your life and going beyond just the anti-Christian stuff. So satanic music, I think some of the great works, Litz, Ravel, some of those composers, I thought had a real satanic appeal, not just in like the darkness of their compositions, but also when you look at some of the things that they had done in their lives, like with Litz. One of my favorite bands, The Residents, I find their approach to things very satanic. They've been making music since early 1970s, and they've never publicly revealed their identities, and they're always trying really new and strange things and trying to be sort of as different as possible in those ways. But something can have a satanic appeal to you. I think almost any kind of music that kind of moves you emotionally and is really set up as sort of different from the norm can be satanic in that sense. Anton LaVey once said in an interview, something like, "Yes, we have no bananas," is probably more satanic in that sense than, some popular heavy metal song, because you can sit in your room, listen to that, and realize you're probably the only person on the planet listening to that at the moment.
Is there anything within Satanism that is taboo that other people might find unusual?
Something that would be taboo to us?
Yeah.
Well, I think when you get together with certain people, there's enough things that sort of become, I wouldn't say taboo, but start becoming impolite, or things that we don't do. Like if you're going to a Church of Satan group, you don't want to start giving free advertisement to other organizations, and, devil worshiping groups, or people that might have propaganda and stuff against us. I don't know if that really falls into taboo as much as sort of like a good thing to post if you want to make a good impression.
So nothing like in Christianity, for example, sort of nudity around other people.
I mean, we do have the 9 satanic sins, which is a list of sort of 9 behaviors that we think go against the principles of Satanism.
Okay.
So stupidity is sin number 1.
Damn it, I can't get in already.
Yeah, pretentiousness, solipsism, self-deceit, herd conformity, forgetfulness of past orthodoxies is another one where people keep buying something that's been reinvented, forgetting that being sold something that's been made before. If you look on churchofsatan.com, you can find the basics of literature there, including the 9 sins and 9 statements.
Just out of curiosity, did you ever meet Anton LaVey?
I did not. I joined right around the time he happened to pass away, so I did not have the opportunity to meet him.
I was just out of curiosity if you've met other Satanists and what their impressions of him were.
I've certainly known, I have friends who did know him, and they've always spoken very highly of him. Even some people I know who weren't Satanists but met him just found him to be a pretty fascinating, down-to-earth individual. Not some gloomy, doomy, scary kind of guy, but just, really friendly, down-to-earth, really passionate about certain things, very knowledgeable about things in the past with music and whatnot.
I'm not too sure, maybe this is a very silly question, but are there any Satanist holidays?
There are. The number 1 satanic holiday is the date of one's own birth. So your own birthday is the most important satanic holiday. This goes perfectly well with what we expect when it's a religion built on self-interest in the self, getting the most out of the self and pushing the self. We say in Satanism, you are your own God. And even though we are atheists, philosophically speaking, I am my own God because I am the person who matters the most at the end of the day. I'm the one who has to answer for my actions. So aside from birthdays, the next ones would be, Walpurgisnacht and Halloween. And we call Halloween Halloween, not Samhain or Samhainism, as pronounced. We don't celebrate it as the harvesting holiday of the Druids. We celebrate it as it's a day when in the rest of the world kind of indulges in the dark aesthetics and stuff. We like the dark aesthetic of it and watching people sort of embrace their darker nature and the alter egos. And Walpurgisnacht is also traditionally an occult holiday on April 30th, which has a similar kind of esoteric reputation as Halloween does, but it's also the founding day of the Church of Satan.
Yeah, certainly these days it's being pushed back a little bit. Halloween, people are being discouraged from laying out their darker side, and everything is too soon, and everything is too dark, and everything is too evil. And I mean, we had in Manchester recently, somebody drew a sort of a gargoyle type face. There's an area where we have artists putting up new pictures every single week almost, it feels like. It's street artists will go to this particular place and they'll put their bit of street art up, and then there'll be sort of an opinion piece about what people think about this. And it was a pretty grisly sort of gargoyle-y face, and I thought that's fantastic. That shows a real dark side that a lot of people don't embrace. And of course it got tons of complaints, just like Halloween does these days. And it's quite depressing, isn't it? It's depressing seeing people suppressing the expression of something that everybody has naturally inside them, but keeps inside of them, sort of suppresses.
Yeah. And especially with gargoyles, the irony being that you see those on churches and, and stuff,
Oh, yeah.
So people didn't complain about it then.
No, because it's spitting out water, isn't it? And it's made of stone. It's not a picture in front of them they have to deal with. It's high up. It's out of sight. Nowhere they need to look at it.
I was going to ask, just on the 6th of June 2006, did you have any big events that day?
We did. We had what was called the High Mass. So we had a ritual and other celebrations in Los Angeles. I was there for that. So what happened was 6606 was coming up as a date. And as I mentioned before, like the actual number doesn't really mean anything in Satanism. But since it has that reputation, we sort of take it and work with it. There was a couple members who had the idea of, hey, let's use that as a good excuse for a party and ritual and stuff. And so they set something up then. And we had a ritual that was based off of the general rituals that are in the Satanic Bible. And there were other things going on as well because Radio Free Satan, who hosts my podcast, we were hitting our 6th anniversary, so we had a celebration of our own the night before. We had a concert and contortionists and freak acts and stuff. It was really fun.
That sounds amazing. You should have one of those over here. Just get involved in that. Need to do some more yoga, get more flexible.
You know, when we do events, we don't necessarily publicize them. I do know some Satanists, though, in the UK who done some rituals. We did one with the Hellfire Caves, I think they're called. In there.
Do they have photographers in? I mean, I'm a very keen photographer, and I'm always looking for a good excuse to get some photographs of things that people might not experience usually. Recently, I did an island experiment where I went across to an island off the North Lanzarote called Graciosa with some Kung Fu people, which was quite interesting. And that gave some opportunity to take some photographs of people doing Kung Fu and Wing Chun and Tai Chi and all that sort of stuff, which I would never have really gotten involved in beforehand because quite a lot of it involves quite a lot of woo, we should say.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, it's interesting to understand people's psychology in terms of that. And the people that I went there with were absolutely lovely. And I've made some new friends for life who I'll never quite understand, but I really enjoy being around. And I'm wondering if the Church of Satan in the UK perhaps might have events where I would be able to get involved and take some photographs and start to understand what's going on there a little bit better.
Well, it's possible, but like I said, it all comes down to what the individual members are doing. That's what the Church of Satan does.
Sure.
You look at what its individual members are doing. It's entirely possible that some Satanists, some of our members who happen to live in the UK might be planning an event and would be willing to, let a photographer visit. So you do want to get shots of that. Maybe you can talk to people. You can talk afterwards.
Cool. That'd be awesome.
Okay. Before we get the housekeeping stuff out of the way with our podcast, where can people find out more about you and what you do, Bill M?
Well, my podcast website is devilsmischief.com. It's a comedy podcast that I've been doing since 2003. And comedy, I think, is a very satanic thing because it's the opposite of piety and piousness. So there's certainly a satanic aspect in that, and that's sort of the angle I take. And sure, skeptics will like this. No shortage of religion bashing stuff, too. So that's always fun to listen to. RadioFreeSatan.com is the site that hosts the podcast. Also just random things about me, my own personal website, I'mJustABill.com. Some people might know the reference of that, but that will have links to my Facebook and everything else.
Cool.
And we'll be sure to put links below to all that stuff.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. I'll definitely reciprocate as the show airs mentioning Trolling with Logic.
Oh, thank you. Well, do you have any final words of wisdom to our listeners? For example, listeners who might feel like they want to join the church, what would you say to them about what kind of people you're looking for and whether or not they should join or not, if there are people out there who are thinking about this?
Well, we'd say we're interested in people who feel honestly that Satanism is a fit for them. And as we said, it's not a religion for everybody, but if it is for you, we encourage you to check out what we have to offer. churchofsatan.com has a lot of free essays you can read. I would also say buy and purchase the Satanic Bible. There unfortunately is not a legal electronic version that's available of it. The publishers haven't released one. It's kind of beyond our control. So if you find copies floating around the internet, I wouldn't trust them because a lot of them are incomplete. Some Christians have like made PDFs with viruses and stuff in them too. So you just get the paperback. The paperback book is ridiculously inexpensive.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. And to our listeners, we want to mention that we do have a Patreon set up. So if you love the show and want to support us with a $5 or more donation, you can do that on Patreon, and we'll have a link to that below as well.
And I'll just butt in there and just to tell, so far you've helped to pay for our podcast and our website hosting, so thanks for the Patreon money. It is helping us a lot.
Yeah, especially to our two patrons. That is Microbloganism and Josh at the Society for the Advancement of Science. Both of them have YouTube channels, I believe, still. And they are our two patrons, and we appreciate their support very much. And so very big thanks to them. If you are a regular listener, it also helps us out to leave us a review on iTunes and get us a little bit more visibility that way. Okay, that was our show for today. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye, all.
Bye.
For centuries, both churchmen and laymen have been defining the devil according to their needs, all the while playing the game of muzzling the enemy. They've been inventing the rules of how devils should behave, how Satanists should behave, how devil worshippers should act. And they have been in an authoritative position to do this, because naturally they are the men of God, they are the men of the church. Supposedly they are the men who've been doing battle with this devil and been absolving their parishioners of these devil's promptings. In this manner have they maintained a convenient means by which to escape the blame for their inadequacies or indiscretions. The devil made me do it has long been a stock alibi. Once it held, and held very firm. Now, fortunately for us, it has become ludicrous to say the devil made me do it.
Tell anybody I work with about Satanism, first and foremost, because I don't think anybody should be discussing, religion in the workplace. Religion and politics are always touchy subjects. But I've gotten a variety of reactions. Most people who I choose to come out with are pretty, level-headed people. And then when I give them the explanation of what it is and what it isn't, they say, okay, I understand, that's your thing and that's fine and I'm fine with it. Some other people who I thought were pretty level-headed and skeptics suddenly become, self-righteous over that dreaded S word. And I've gotten some negative reactions as well. But fortunately, those have been pretty minimal. But again, a lot of it comes down to choosing who you decide to come out to as a Satanist.
Yeah, because a lot of, what I've known in the skeptic and atheist community, they tend to view this as, Satanism is just, it's kind of unnecessary provoking of the religious. And do you ever get that at all?
Well, yeah, I've been accused of that, and people try saying, oh, you're a Satanist because you hate your Christian parents or you're angry against them. I'm like, no, I discovered Satanism after I'd already moved out of my parents' place, and I get along great with my parents, and they're still married and together. And no, I wasn't abused as a kid, or, sorry to disappoint you. Not you specifically, but, some of these people who say that. And it's true that within the skeptic community, a lot of people will see that we do ritual and just jump to conclusions saying, well, Satanism is a religion and therefore I want to see it eradicated just with all the other religions. But as I think you covered well in the episode prior, most recent one that I listened to of Trolling with Logic about the biological component of religion, I personally believe that religion is not something that's going to completely go away. It's not anytime soon. And non-theistic religions do exist. Satanism is one example of that.
Yeah, fantasy and ritual are...
But I did want to put in this message at the beginning to let you know that the audio quality is not great on my end. It is tolerable and intelligible, but my not-so-trusty Blue Yeti microphone decided to break down right before we recorded, so I had to resort to using my headset, which resulted in lesser quality sound on my end than regular listeners might be used to. And with that out of the way, enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to Trolling with Logic, the podcast where we bring the hammer down on ignorance, unreason, and superstition on a bi-weekly basis. I am your host, Nathan Dickey, and with me today, for the first time in a while, I think, is the whole crew. Cal.
Hi there.
Cal's here. Kitch is here.
Hail Santa.
And Jen is here as well with us.
Hail Satan, food of the vegans.
On today's episode, we're covering maybe, potentially, what might be a controversial topic among our listeners. We're talking about Satanism, specifically of the variety formulated and defined by Anton Szandor LaVey, who founded the Church of Satan 51 years ago, 1966, and as codified in LaVey's seminal work, The Satanic Bible, which was published in 1969. And joining us today to talk about this subject is Reverend Bill M, who is a priest in the Church of Satan and who holds the title of Magister in the Church's hierarchy. Bill M has personally conducted satanic weddings and funerals and has appeared on radio and television to discuss various aspects of LaVeyan Satanism. In addition to writing for various satanic publications, Bill also hosts the Devil's Mischief podcast on the Radio Free Satan Network, which, if I'm not mistaken, has the distinction of being the longest-running RFS podcast. Is that correct?
The longest-running Satanism podcast that I know of.
Well, outside of the Church of Satan, Bill also holds bachelor's and master's degrees in mathematics, has a special passion for music, and is also a member of the High IQ Society Mensa. Lots of M's going on there. Welcome to the show, Bill M.
Thank you for having me. And I enjoy Trolling with Logic. I've listened to a number of your episodes. You have a great thing going on here.
Thank you very much.
Let's start by clearing up some of the most common misconceptions right off the bat about the Church of Satan, held by large portions of the general public and even among skeptics as well. Quite contrary to the impression I had growing up as a child in the 90s, which was during the peak and tail end of the satanic panic here in the States. Satanists do not worship the devil, nor do they engage in human or animal sacrifices. What does Satan actually represent to you and your church?
Well, that's correct, and Satan for us is a metaphor. We're a religion about the carnal rather than spiritual, and we think Satan is the best mythological archetype in this day and age to sort of represent that. So we embrace a lot of things that have been traditionally given the devil's name, like pride, lust, rational self-interest, skepticism, nonconformity, atheism, humor, and so on. We find these things to be self-empowering, so we shamelessly embrace them rather than shun them.
Let's talk about your position in the Church of Satan as sort of a gateway to getting into the hierarchical structure of the organization.
Sure.
What privileges and responsibilities are assumed by those such as yourself with the rank of Magister?
Well, first, just to give a quick correction before, you had mentioned me as both a priest and Magister. Those are technically two different levels. But they're all considered part of the priesthood, and anybody from priest up above can be addressed as reverend, so I don't take it as a demotion or anything. But we give out titles just based off of individual merit, and if we see somebody who is in the organization who seems to be representing the philosophy well and really creating a number of things, seems to grasp it, seems to be a good spokesperson for it, then we may give them a title. It's sort of an honorary thing. It's not an initiatory thing. I didn't become a magister because, I memorized these scrolls or, something silly like that. That's where the titles really come from. People in priesthood in general up above can be official media representatives of the organization. That's why the Church of Satan got in contact with me after you contacted their office for an interview.
I just have to ask, probably the one question you ask them, what is, when you meet new people for the first time and you tell them your involvement in the Church of Satan, what's the kind of reactions you get?
I've gotten a variety of reactions. A lot of Satanists, including myself, are usually, reluctant to necessarily come out as Satanists. I certainly don't.
Satan is to us a symbol rather than an anthropomorphic being, although many members of the Church of Satan who are mystically inclined would prefer to think of Satan in a very real anthropomorphic way. Of course, we do not discourage this because we realize that to many individuals, a well-wrought picture of their mentor or their tutelary divinity is very important for them to conceptualize ritualistically. However, Satan symbolically is the teacher, the informer of the whys and the wherefores of the world. And in answer to those who would label us devil worshippers or be very quick to assume us to be Satan worshippers, I must say that Satan demands study, not worship, in its truest symbology.
Hello, listeners. I'm Nathan Dickey, host of Trolling with Logic, and the voice you just heard was that of Anton Szandor LaVey, 1930 to 1997, the writer and musician best known as the founder of the Church of Satan, author of the Satanic Bible, and figurehead of modern Satanism. That particular recording of LaVey is taken from Nat Friedland's LP recording, The Occult Explosion, released by United Artists Records in 1973. On this episode, we interviewed Magister Bill M, a fourth-degree reverend in the Church of Satan. It was a lively and fascinating conversation that we think you'll enjoy.